Folks, this is Master Corporal Moore, and today I'm going to bring to you my final installment in my series of videos on Clan Wars Viable Tanks. In this fourth and final episode, I'm going to cover off Tier 10 tanks. First section I'm going to cover off is going to be the heavy tanks, and ultimately I'm going to start with the T110E5. It's the first Tier 10 heavy that I actually got, and it's an excellent tank. It really got a couple of excellent buffs, which changed it significantly from being an inferior tank because it was penned by everything, including E100s, to being something that people say needs a nerf. Ultimately, though, you'll see this a lot, especially on maps that require gun depression, maneuverability, and good frontal armor. The next one I'm going to cover off is going to be the E100. As opposed to the E5, this thing does not like open terrain. It is not very maneuverable. It is a large brick. This is the E75, so it's going to look a little bit different for the E100. However, you have the same idea with the frontal slope, side scraping, that sort of thing. It has a excellent huge gun, great alpha, low penetration, low rate of fire though, so it doesn't have the DPM, and it's going to be a little bit trollish with its ability to penetrate, especially against that pesky E5, which has sloped armor and great armor profiles. However, E100 is something that you're going to want to get in your stable. The next one I'm going to cover off is going to be the IS-7, and really the IS-7 and the E5 are two of the ones that I recommended in a previous video because you can go straight up through the Tier 6, 8, and 10 and have a Clan Wars viable tank at each of those tiers. So the IS-7 basically is going to have a 122mm gun, excellent angled piked armor in the front, dome turret. It's going to be very bouncy, very trollish. It is also very maneuverable. When the game was first developed, Wargaming believed that the IS-7 was going to be the Tier 10 tank to have. And ultimately they have done quite a bit to keep it there. But things have changed, and there's a few more tanks that have become more popular. However, the IS-7 is something to get into your stable. Comparatively, the IS-4 is not a bad idea. However, for getting into something quick, I recommend the KV-85, IS-3, IS-7 line. Now, as an alternative, if you have decided to go up through the Chinese lines, you're going to end up on the 113. Now, this is actually the Tier 9. I don't have the IS-7, I don't have the E100, and I don't have the 113. I have the Tier 9 variants of each of those at this point, but as you can see, I'm currently grinding them out and look forward to actually finishing those grinds. The 113, I've seen much more use of these tanks in Tier 10 Clan Wars, and as such, they had to get at least an honorable mention. However, E5, E100, IS-7 are the three you're going to want to get. The next two tanks I'm going to cover off are going to be the other two Tier 10 heavy tanks that I didn't mention, and that's the T57 and the AMX-50B. These two both sport a 120mm autoloader gun. The American T57 has a higher rate of fire for two reasons. One, it has a shorter reload in the drum, and two, it has a shorter reload to reload the drum. So it is actually one of the highest, if not the highest, DPM Tier 10 there is out there. That makes it very viable. It has better armor profile than the 50B. It has a couple of other advantages to it as well. But ultimately the 50B has the advantage of maneuverability. I've seen these things bounce some serious trollish rounds, and I've seen these things just focus down very quickly. I am personally a fan of the 57 first. However, the accuracy of this gun, the aim time, the dispersion, and the maneuverability of this tank make it an excellent support tank for flanking around and shifting through the battle. So both of these have their viability. The T57 for its raw punching power and DPM, and the 50B for its maneuverability. I'm not going to get into the debate between which one's better. Moving on to the mediums, I'm going to start off by going over the Russian mediums. We've got the Object 140 and the 62A. I already covered off in a previous video how the 140 and 62A can both be researched from the same tech tree line, which you have to go through the 54, or can go through the 54 lightweight, and the 3485, which gives you a Tier 6 and a Tier 8 Clan Wars viable tank, as well as giving you the opportunity to unlock two Tier 10 medium tanks. So it's an excellent line to go towards, plus they're highly viable. You're going to see these things in Clan Wars in mass. The 140 I prefer, and a lot of other people do prefer. It has an extra degree of gun depression over the rest of the Russian mediums. It is very mobile. The 62A is only slightly less mobile, but has other benefits in mobility. The other thing is 62A has a better shaped turret, which gives it a little bit more survivability, even though it is a little bit taller. However, like I said, I do recommend the 140. Excellent tank. You will not regret it. I'll mention the 430 and the Object 907 real quick. 907 being a reward tank. The 430 and the 907 have identical DPM, and they are actually the highest DPM mediums in the game. Now, the drawbacks of the 430 and Object 907 is going to be in the survivability. They don't have the armor profile that you're going to find with the Object 140 or 62A. So although they do have great DPM and excellent camo value, they do not have the mobility, the armor profile, or the gun handling that you're going to find in the other two. So ultimately, it's not going to be the top of my list of recommendations for Tier 10 medium tanks. However, it does fit into the hardtop medium category. The next two I'm going to cover off are going to be the Batchat 25T as well as the TVP T5051. The first one being the French autoloader Tier 10 medium and an amazing scout. The second one being a autoloader from the Czechoslovakian line. The 5051 does not get as many rounds as the 25T in a single drum. However, it can fire off its rounds much quicker, has a better aim time, better accuracy, and better gun handling. And it has a faster reload between magazines or drums. So it does have a major advantage in that respect. That being said, the Batchat, while not as well as far as camo value, not being as good as the Object 430, it is number 3 for the Tier 10 mediums, has great view range capabilities, and makes an excellent scout. Ultimately, take off the vertical stabilizer that I currently have installed on mine and put on binoculars or coated optics, and you can make a great scout out of it. But even as it sits right now with excellent camo value, it can do a great job for you. However, if you want it just for the sheer flanking power, recommend the TVP 5051. Either way, great tanks. The Batchat is an easier one to get up to. The TVP does have some weak tier tanks that can be difficult for some people to grind through. The next two I'm going to cover off are going to be the Leopard 1 and the STB 1. The Leopard 1 has amazing gun depression, and the STB 1 has better. Ultimately, the Leopard 1 has wicked gun handling. 9 degrees of gun depression, very accurate, 0.28 accuracy with my current crew. Excellent DPM, not 430 or even 140 categories, but 3200 damage is great. It does get 410 meters base view range and not a bad camo value. So this is a great long range sniper. You're not going to see it used a lot, but it can be used from time to time as a scout sniper or a support tank. So I figured I would mention it. Alternatively, the STB1 is one that I'm going to recommend, second only to the 430 and obviously the 907. This thing has great DPM. The gun handling is a little bit questionable, but with 10 degrees of gun depression, you're able to basically peek over berms and leave very little tank showing as you do so. You can bounce lots of rounds, especially if you keep moving, pop over, and shoot. You do have to be careful because of the long aim time and bad dispersion of the tank. However, I've seen some really amazing numbers when these things are used properly and to their full advantage. So they can be something to go towards. I'm not going to recommend the STB1 or the Leopard 1 for your first few tanks. However, get these in your stable and you will not regret it. And the next section that I'm going to run down is going to be the TDs. Now, I don't have a lot of them in my garage. However, I do like picking them when I'm calling battles from time to time. There is different pros and cons to each and every one of them. However, TDs as a general rule are not going to be one that I'm going to recommend getting first unless you really like your TDs. Ultimately, most of the battle is going to be filled out with the tier 10 heavies and mediums that I already mentioned. However, you're going to see certain battles that will bring out a lot of TDs. Things like Ensk, where you can get very narrow driving lanes and there's a lot of rubble and buildings and windows to poke through. You're going to see some TDs, especially in a turtle strat. However, it's not always going to be so cut and dry. The T110E3, which I don't have, looks very similar to this, just with no turret, is a great tank, excellent DPM, the average damage of 750 a shot, and great armor profile. The E4 sacrifices some of the armor, but gains you 180 degree of turret traverse, so you can actually turn your turret halfway around both ways. It's still very limiting, and tanks that are aware of that are going to flank you and just shoot you in the back. However, that being said, it's still very handy to have some sort of turret traverse so that you can simply set up, get camoed, and just turn your turret without having to turn your whole tank. Another one that has at least a semi-turret, and you can tell that I don't play a lot of the non-turreted TDs by the fact that the two that I do have are turreted. Now, semi-turreted would be a better term because, again, this one only gets a few degrees of traverse. Basically, you can only turn about this far. Now, the gun on this thing is just phenomenal. However, once it starts shooting, it gets lit pretty quick, very little armor, and it will get ravaged. Now, the one that I'm going to recommend the most is probably going to be the Object 263. The 268 is okay, but the 263, this is actually an SU-122S Tier 7 Premium, but it's just being used as my model for explaining the two Russian TDs. The 263, as I was saying, is much more maneuverable. It does have an open top, so it's susceptible to arty fire. However, it has the maneuverability and the ability to flex and do what it needs to. Excellent gun, very high rate of fire, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're a caller. Get to know the tank a little bit better, and maybe you're going to pull a couple more 263s in. 268 is not one that I'm going to recommend because I just feel that the 263 performs better in most situations, and in pretty much every situation one of them would be chosen. The 263 has all the characteristics you're going to be looking for. The other one is going to be the German Jag E100. Again, much like the E3, it has the ability to tank a lot of rounds. It's very squarish, much like the E100 is. It doesn't have any curves, it's all sharp lines, but it has some very, very thick plates and a big, big gun that's probably very fun to fire. The other two that I haven't mentioned is going to be the two British, and while they can be very novel, the Alpha is phenomenal if you penetrate and if you hit. They have poor gun handling. One has excellent maneuverability, but not excellent enough to really make up for the fact that you move and you're going to have a very long aim time. So ultimately, 263, the E4, and the Grill are going to be the first three that I can recommend to you, but also considering the Jag E100 is something that you can look at as well. Last section I'm going to cover off here is going to be the Tier 10 artillery. Now, the British one is going to be the second one that I'm going to recommend getting. It has an amazing gun arc, the ability to fire up and over buildings and get very close behind them, so it's great for digging out heavily entrenched enemies. It does have a decent gun on it as well. Now, while a lot of people will argue the merits of the Russian and the German Tier 10 artillery, they don't have as good of a gun arc and they are not very mobile. So while the British one doesn't have the mobility, the fact that it's got an excellent gun arc does make it quite viable for Tier 10 clan wars. The number one I'm going to recommend, however, is going to be the M53, M55 Tier 9 American TD or artillery. The Tier 10 T92 has one of the biggest guns in the game, if not the biggest gun in the game, and can be very devastating when it hits. However, the Tier 9 has a faster rate of fire and much more maneuverability. Those are two keys that any battle caller is going to prefer. So while the T92 is not a bad artillery, it's not the one that I'm going to endorse. And as an added bonus, this is a Tier 9, so you don't even have to grind out the Tier 10 to have a Clan Wars viable tank. The last one, and I would say this one's somewhere in the middle as far as being called for, is the French Batchat 155-58. The unique part about this one is it does have a fully traversable turret, so you can have your hull pointed whichever direction you want and turn your turret towards the enemy. Additionally, if you are needing to shift quickly to another target, you can turn your turret and your hull to speed up the traverse of your gun. This has the fastest aim time of all 5 artillery. It can be quite accurate, however, I find it does not do nearly as much damage as some of the other artillery and doesn't have as good of penetration. So while you can get lucky occasionally, unless you have soft skin targets to shoot at, this thing's going to be averaging about 4 to 450 damage per shot. So it does have that drawback, as well as the fact that when you do unload your 4 rounds, you have 70 seconds before you're ready to go again. So hopefully I've covered off all of them to your liking. If not, unfortunately, they're the ones that you're going to hear asked for the most part, by your battle callers and your clan commanders. When you're trying to get into some of the higher tier clans, you're going to be asked what tier 10 Clan Wars viable tanks you're going to have in your garage. They're going to be looking through all the different websites that tell them what tanks you have. They're going to be looking to see if you have a 54 lightweight and how you do in that tank. They're going to be looking at 140s, 62As, the E5, the IS-7, the E100, all of these viable tanks are going to be the ones they're going to be looking for. And in the high-end clans, they're going to be looking for how you perform in those tanks as well. So, hopefully this video has put together enough tanks for you to choose from. And ultimately, they're the ones that are going to be making you successful. If you can get good at playing them, you're going to find yourself called into a lot of Clan Wars battles over other people, simply because they know that they can rely on your ability and that you have the right tank for the job. So, until next time, I hope I see you on the Clan Wars battlefield.